Hey everyone, this is Scott at Celigo, and a couple weeks ago I did a video introducing the idea of using AI and iPaaS to build an AI-powered chatbot in Slack. I wanted to do a follow-up video where I really do a deep dive on what that looks like now compared to when I did the video weeks back. We learned a lot of interesting little details that make the chatbot a lot smarter and a lot more effective as a tool for everyone in the org. We have a lot of people using the chatbot now internally at Celigo. Anyway, I just wanted to share as much useful info as possible with anyone else out there that's trying to build something similar. So let me jump right into the flows, and then I'll eventually go over to Slack to show you what it looks like over there as well. So the first thing I want to highlight, so we have everything, first of all, in a Celigo AI projects workspace. Within there, I have a little flow grouping, a folder for the knowledge chatbot, and you can see that it is just 3 flows, so it's relatively simple solution. The first 2 flows we'll look at are the flows that get knowledge type data into Pinecone. And originally I had other sources, but one thing we learned was less better quality information is better than just having everything up there in an uncurated form. So we have just our kind of formal product documentation, which is Zendesk articles, and then we have just one Slack channel that everyone uses where really the best answers are hosted. And so we're feeding just those 2 sources into Pinecone and using that as the foundation for answering questions. Again, we found that better info is better than having just lots of info because it gets overwhelming quickly. So I'm going to drill into the Zendesk article flow. This is, again, the flow that syncs all of our just articles in our product documentation to Pinecone. All right, so the export to get the Zendesk articles out is really straightforward. I'm just getting recently updated help articles, and of course you can rewind this as Delta Flow. We can rewind it back all the way to the beginning as far as we want to get historical stuff. It's just doing a get. Again, Delta uses next page URL and so on. So again, all straightforward. I have a script on this source export, and let's just really quickly look at what I'm doing there. And let me just get to the function, get Zendesk articles. And so what I'm doing in the script, and again, I'm a JavaScript person. I love, well, not a JavaScript person. I like to write code versus doing rule-based stuff. So you could do a lot of this stuff in our filter rules and transforms and whatnot, but I just like to do it in a quick function. I'm just excluding if it's a draft, leave it out. If it's by certain user segments, leave it out. If comments were disabled, that means it's not really a public article, leave it out. I have one article that's massive, so there's a little bit of code in here to break it apart into different sections. I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but just if you have a huge article that doesn't fit in Pinecone as is, you can break it into pieces. And then I'm also doing I'm stripping out all the HTML in these articles. Zendesk gives you the article with the HTML. It's not really complicated HTML, but it is still HTML. I wanted to pull that out. I built a very simple HTML to plain text function here doing regular expressions. I did not actually write this code myself. I went to ChatGPT 4 and just said, hey, here's some HTML, here's what I want. Just write me a JavaScript function to remove everything, and it did it for me. So I find that I'm doing that all the time now instead of writing code myself. So that was really helpful. And actually, I think it's going to open the door for a lot more people doing scripting-based solutions because you can just go over and ask something like ChatGPT to write your script for you. The metadata that I store around the embedding in Pinecone, I have the actual, I have the content of the article itself. I have the date that it was updated. I have some metadata about like the section that article lives in Zendesk. I have the article ID, of course, and then I have a link to the HTML URL as well, because when I use this source to answer something, I'm always providing links back to the things that I used to answer questions. So one of the like foundational things we at Celigo are saying about AI is that AI is a wonderful assistant for a human, but a human is always needed to verify and validate that the answer is what it should be before sending it along to anyone else. And so everything that we do, every time we have an AI generated answer somewhere, we're going to provide a link to where the answer came from so that a human can say, yep, that looks good or not. It's really an accelerator for the humans that already know the answers versus being able to answer things blindly. That's a key thing. AI is not ready to be trusted. It hallucinates all the time, even on basic stuff. So you really need that validation from a human for an AI generated thing before passing it along to use. But AI is still very helpful. It's very much an accelerator. It can pre-write things for you, find these articles that you need to go searching for. So again, a lot of benefits still, even though you need the human still. And then I think the last thing I wanted to point out here too is that articles in Zendesk often have links to other articles. So I'm capturing that also in the metadata. So I get the content of the article. I find all the links. Again, I just asked ChatGPT to write me a JavaScript function to find links. And then I just have the links to any other articles in the metadata as well. So now I can, if I want to, load related articles in downstream places whenever I'm looking at this article in Pinecone. Okay, so that's getting the articles out of Zendesk, and then very straightforward, I create an embedding for the article, just the content of the article, not the metadata. That's a really simple flow step. Resource embeddings, create embeddings, and then in your mapping, you can see the exact fields that are getting sent over. And so on. And then, response map back in the embedding itself and also the number of tokens. So I sent this to OpenAI to get an embedding. They gave me back an embedding in this field. They gave me back the number of tokens that were in the content that I embedded. And so I response map that back into my source record because I'm going to use that. And then I also have the num tokens. And so I want to keep track of num tokens because whenever I'm going to use this content from this article to send back to OpenAI to answer a question, knowing the number of tokens that it is helps me size the number of articles that I can include when sending a question. So let's say I have a question and there's like 5 articles that might help, but the first one's massive and then the other ones are really small. Knowing that, I can say, well, let's just pull the one big one and don't even try to send the other ones because we're going to overload. Or I could say, let's just get the smaller articles, or just keep adding articles to the list until you run out of tokens. Any of those patterns are valid, but keeping track of the num tokens is really what's important. And then I just upsert into Pinecone. So one difference from what we were doing before, like weeks ago when I demoed these ideas in that other video, I was asking, actually, let me show it in the next step. Sorry, let me go over. So same pattern with Slack, and this is where the difference is. It's not in that one. So here in Slack, we're getting conversations, threads from Slack from a very specific channel, getting all the replies. I'm not going to go into the same level of detail here. It's all very straightforward. Get the conversation, get the replies, and then create an embedding. And then here's where there's a difference. Before, what I was doing is I was asking GPT-4 to take the Slack conversation and create a knowledge base article, and then I was embedding the content of the article that was generated for me and storing that in Pinecone. And then when someone would ask a question, I would go find that article and use that article as a source of truth to answer a question. Now, what I found was that GPT-4, while sometimes it's great at summarizing a Slack thread and creating an article, other times it's terrible. And it's not yet ready to like rely on that blindly. So when you have thousands and thousands of Slack conversations, some of them being good, some of them being terrible, it ended up just being kind of a dead end, because when I'm looking at how it would answer questions later, I would just be like, why did it say that? And then, digging into that, it was like, because when it was summarizing some of these conversations, it was making mistakes and summarizing the wrong thing, missing key points, leaving out details. And then that was my foundation of truth now. And so what I did instead, and this worked much better, is I'm just actually creating an embedding for the serialized conversation from Slack as is. So it's this big, huge JSON serialized object, kind of hard to look at from a human standpoint, but I just put that in Pinecone as an embedding, and then when I ask questions on it, I send that ugly thing back to OpenAI GPT-4 to answer the question. And so instead of using GPT-4 to create an article that then gets used, I'm just letting it use the raw conversation itself to answer the question later, and it performed much better. There was just a lot less room for it to add in its own kind of information. So I noticed that GPT-4 and of course 3.5 and below, they all will add in stuff that you don't want. They make assumptions, and again, they just make lots of little mistakes. And so you want to really minimize the number of places where you let an AI change or modify your data. And so all my flows now try to keep the data as raw as possible, getting it into Pinecone. And then when I go and find information from Pinecone, I keep it raw. And then when I send it to GPT-4, which is the smartest AI that we have available to answer questions, I send the raw information to GPT-4 with the question. And then I find that it's actually, that's like the best one-shot way to get the answer. And so anyway, that's definitely a best practice that I've found, is just keep the information as raw as possible to send to that final Q&A. And any place where you let GPT summarize, extract, create things, it's gonna make mistakes. So okay, and then just again here, just real quick, let me look into see. So when I'm getting the Slack conversations, let me just see what I'm doing in this script here. Oops. Where are we? Okay, get Slack conversations. Where is it? There we go. Okay, so here again, just doing some filtering, making sure it's the right channel, etc. And then I think the other one that the part that I wanted to show though was over here. Let's see. Okay, yeah, so serialize the Slack thread. So this is after I've gotten all the replies. I just wanted to show that the thing that I'm embedding is a JSON.stringify of the Slack thread itself. So just a very let's see, can we see it? Yeah, so this is like the thing that gets sent for the embedding. You see it's not very readable. It's kind of ugly, but GPT-4 at the very end has no problem reading this versus trying to have it create something new from this and storing that's not as good. Okay, I'm gonna move on. All right, so two flows one for Zendesk articles, one for our very important Slack channel that has all the good product stuff in it, and then a final flow, and this is the one that is doing, all the fancy work. It starts out first and foremost with a listener. So we're listening to a channel in Slack where people are asking questions. So we'll go into that channel and look at that in a minute here. But the very initial part of the bubble is to listen for posts. Now, in here I have a script where I pre-process the posts. Let's go look at that real quick. All right, so here I'm just making sure the message type and channel are correct. I am getting information about the post so that when I eventually finish, I can go and update the original post and I want to do replies to the original post. I don't want to post back into the channel, so we're always doing replies. Have some fancy JavaScript here to go and find, let's say someone posts, and I'll talk about this part in a second, but let's say someone posts some links. I got to go find them. Slack has this crazy formatting where you have to go down through all these elements to find any possible links. So I just did like a triple loop to go find all possible links and get them out. And then once I have a link, I'm parsing those links to see if someone's telling me to use a specific article and so on. And then that's it, just returning the record there. Okay, so now let's look at what this flow is doing. So when I showed this flow weeks ago, it was just a very simple line. Now it is lots of different branches for different use cases, and we'll go into each of those right here. And you may not want all of this. You may just need the simple line. That's also valid. But there's definitely some cool stuff here that you may find that you want to replicate, or this integration is out in our marketplace. I'll show that at the end as well. You can go download a copy of it and use it as your getting started point. Okay, so the first thing is hey, did the user provide sources? So when people are writing in Slack, I built in this thing where they could actually ask a question and then paste a link to the knowledge base article that they want me to use. Maybe I know exactly which article has the information. So here's the question, here's the article that has information. I'm just lazy. I don't want to write out the answer myself. So that's supported. Someone can give me the article ID. I go and get it in that hook that we just looked at. And then what I do with that is I fetch that article from Pinecone. So I know the ID of it. I just do a fetch. So I'm not doing a vector search or anything like that. I'm literally just going and getting that article out of Pinecone. If I were looking at this from a Postman standpoint, you can see here I did a fetch on a specific article, and I get back this value. And you'll notice that in the metadata I have the content. So I'm using Pinecone for both the vector values, the embedding values, and also the article content itself. So as long as you're not dealing with massive articles, you can use Pinecone and store the thing you're embedding in Pinecone, with the embedding itself. This is really nice because you have just one data source that you have to deal with, and it's you use it for storing embeddings, finding meaningful things, and then you also have the meaningful thing right there. If for some reason you didn't want to do that, you could obviously store it somewhere else, have a link here in the metadata, and then go load it separately. But luckily, everything I'm dealing with fits in Pinecone directly. So again, super quick accelerator there. So anyway, I go and get that content. I do a response mapping to put it back into the record that's being processed. The Slack message that's being processed is represented as a single record. And so I have that now. And then, and so now what I do at the end here is I send the article and question to GPT-4. So again, real straightforward as to what you set up. We're just pointing to the chat, create chat completion. And then the field mapping is where all the magic happens. So anyone who's dealt with ChatGPT, this will look really similar. We're using GPT-4 as the model. For messages, we're sending two messages, one system message, one user message. Temperature 0, max tokens 1,000. If you haven't, seen the playground, over here. If you have your own OpenAI account, highly recommend using the playground to also build your prompts. So one thing we do is we build it here first, test it, make sure it works, and then we'll go over and put it into our flow. Typically, that's definitely the best practice. One thing I should just highlight right here too. Where is it? Let's see. Let me move this over so these are all together. So OpenAI put out a GPT best practices, super helpful. So I was doing my prompts very different before I read this, almost like the inversion of what they're saying here. Before I was using my system prompt to say like, you're a helpful assistant, you're gonna do this. And then I was doing all these rules and stuff inside the user prompts. After reading this, they kind of inverted that, and it's like, hey, put everything, put all the high-level instructions on what you're going to do inside the system prompt. Put all the rules. And then for the user prompts, put the data that's kind of variable, call to call. And so here, this is the one where we're asking a question, and we're saying, you will be provided with multiple documents, like multiple knowledge base articles, each delimited by triple quotes. So I tell OpenAI GPT-4 how the different articles will be delimited, and you'll see now there's triple quotes here. And then your task is to answer the following question. And so this question is dynamic, and we'll see how this is done in the mapping in a second. But so this is the dynamic part. And then here are the rules that I'm giving it. I'm saying provide a detailed response. Only provide code samples when code samples are provided in the document. So don't always do code samples. I noticed it was doing code samples way too much when they weren't even relevant. I don't want it to recommend contacting support or reading documentation. It was recommending that all the time as well. I said, do not respond with non-definitive information. Do not say it's not clear, it's not documented, there's not enough info. That's not helpful. If you cannot answer the question, then please respond with the text, sorry, unable to answer this one. So just get to the point and say, I can't answer this one. And then finally, because I know my answer is going to be going back into Slack, and this is just so neat how this works. You can say output Slack messaging formatting. And then I gave it, so it didn't know how to do it from that alone, but I gave it the syntax, bold, italics, code. And once I did that, it started to return everything in a way that I could simply post right back to Slack, and it would, do the right bold, italics, and so on. So I thought that was really cool. And then over here, again, this is where I'm sending the articles all delimited by triple quotes. So here in the playground, you can, create these, debug them, you can save them. This is all really cool. You can share them with your colleagues. So a way for everyone to kind of see how to do these, get good at iterating with each other and so on. Plugging it back into flows, very trivial after that. You create a system message, you have your user messages. In the system message, I'm hard coding role, and then for content, we can you can see, so here's where I actually type out my system message. And the one key thing I just want to highlight is that, using our product, you can make anything dynamic. It's just handlebars, and you can inject anything you want at any point. So the system prompt can be dynamic. And then, of course, we have the user prompt. So the second message, role hard-coded user. And then if we were to look at what the actual content is of the message, we're just doing a handlebars expression for all of the articles that we found as a match, where we surround them in triple quotes like we said we would, and then put in the content from our payload. So again, super easy to make these, very dynamic, unlimited in terms of what you want to send and how you want to format stuff. And then these editors are really nice because you can see all the resources available, you can preview them, test it, get it working the way you want. You can do handlebars expressions, standard, hard-coded, lookups. There's a lot of functionality built into this mapper to cover basically any use case you can imagine. At every step, being able to preview to see the input and the output to make sure it's working like you want. And then, of course, when you get all the pieces working, you can also, from the bubble directly, edit your mock input to, send either a preview to see what it would look like if you were to send, or you can actually go into send mode where you send live calls to OpenAI from our product. So you could do this in the Playground and Postman, or you can do this here. But it's nice to be able to test everything from it's good to test everything in pieces. As you build out each piece, you want to test to make sure it works like what you want, and then go on to the bigger view and test that, and slowly you're zooming out and testing along the way. Okay, so then once we send the articles and the question to GPT, they of course will give us an answer. So that's where I map that back into my record, into a field called AI generated answer. I then post that answer back into Slack. Again, all very straightforward how to get that into Slack. It's the chat.postmessage endpoint, and you can see the mapping here. This is where I'm doing some unique stuff. I don't want to unfurl links or anything. This is where I point to the original thread that it was posted to, so that we're doing replies in Slack. And then here, maybe it's worth looking at, again, handlebars expressions are a super powerful way to build the value for anything that you want with any format. And here I'm just doing like Slack formatting, AI generated answer using Zendesk articles. So I want to say where the thing, where the sources came from. So here's the answer. I'm telling it that I'm using Zendesk articles here, which was the case because we provided links to articles. And then, and so it's going to post that to Slack. And then finally, after it posts that, I do one more post to Slack. And in this case, what I'm doing is submitting a second. So I post the answer in one reply, and in the second reply, I post a link to all of the sources that I used. Okay, so let me go here and okay, so here's the second post that I do where I want to let the person know the exact articles that I use. So for each article, just say article 1, article 2, article 3. We'll see this in a minute, but sometimes I'm shrinking articles if they're too big. If I do, then I say, hey, I only used excerpts from this article. Provide a link to the article for convenience. If there was a score, so if I found this article via a similarity search on Pinecone, then I just share the score, like how close of a match this was. And then finally, how I found the article, and there are 3 different ways, and we'll see that again in detail soon. But if I found it via Pinecone, then I let people know that it was by a similarity search. If I found it via a linked article, maybe I found an article from Pinecone, but then it had linked articles that I ended up using, then I say linked article, and then the final option is I'm also doing Google searches on Celigo's docs to see if Google finds something that Pinecone or linked articles did not find. So that's the other option. But again, I want to let people know, here's the articles that I used. Here was their score. If I only used excerpts, I want to tell them that. And then also, how did I find this article? That's also really helpful for, at least for debugging the flow and making it better. But I think users also find that useful to see that. Okay, so that's it in terms of that initial branch where the user provided their own source, and I went all the way through to the end. So we won't have to do that again on every single one of these branches. I won't cover those end steps again, but I wanted to go start to finish again when the user gives you the links to the sources to use. When they do not give you a link to the source to use, then what I'm doing is running a similarity search. This is where I'm now going to start using Pinecone vectors and running similarity searches. The first thing I do to do that, though, is I have to create an embedding for the question that was asked on Slack. So when someone types something, I have to actually create an embedding for it to then go find vector matches in Pinecone. So that's what I'm doing here. After I have the embedding, now here is where I go down 2 different branches. In this case, I'm doing both the branches in parallel. The first branching that we looked at was one or the other. Like if they provided a link to the article, I'm not actually going down this path. I just stop up there. But in this case, I'm going to go down both branches because I want to find an answer using our formal product documentation Zendesk articles. And then I also want to provide an answer separately using the Slack threads in our main product channel. Originally, I was looking for all things together. I was not separating out Zendesk articles from Slack threads. This, I don't think that's a good practice anymore. So we thought about this a lot, and so what happens, like maybe the main downside is that things like Slack can overpower things like Zendesk. You'll search for someone will type a very simple question, and then you'll just get the top 3 Slack messages that are really high matches, but then maybe don't even provide the answer, or they provide a nuanced answer, and then the formal documentation is just left out altogether. So that's one reason to separate them out. The other one is that, so eventually we're going to expose the ability to ask questions in our product directly through a chat interface. So that's coming out pretty soon. And the chat interface is coming out very soon. The Q&A formally TBD, because we're still weighing the pros and cons of how accurate it is, if we put it out there and the answer is wrong, how do we make sure people know they have to validate answers? So there's some kind of like philosophical things we're debating still. But when we eventually launch that Q&A in our product directly, we obviously don't want our internal Slack threads to be feeding that knowledge. We want it to run entirely off of our product knowledge base. So again, another reason to separate is that for Celigo employees, we're able to use both sources. For customers someday, or partners or whatever, we're only going to provide the answers are only going to look at what's formally documented. And then also what's very cool about separating these out is, when we're looking at the answer, we can say, did the answer from Zendesk articles, was it any good? If not, what about the Slack answer? A lot of times we see a Slack answer it just has that side conversation that happened because the docs were missing. So we'll see, Slack had the answer, the Zendesk articles did not. Now it's much easier to go update the Zendesk articles because you can see the answer in Slack from the Slack answer, from the Slack source. You can see the right answer. You can see the articles that it found that didn't have the answer, and it's just very easy to see like where you need to improve your docs. So this whole exercise has been really helpful for us, just really looking critically at our docs versus Slack and keeping both of them in sync with each other, and getting our docs better really is the most important thing in my opinion. Is just when we see that Slack has an answer that our documentation doesn't, this little solution, this little knowledge bot, chatbot, really puts that right in the spotlight. And again, makes it easy for the doc team to see the answer, see someone say, yep, that's correct, this one's wrong, and then they can do the update really quickly. Okay, so now let's say that we're going down the first source where we're looking at Zendesk articles, our formal product documentation. The first thing I do is I run a Google search. So here I'm using SERP API, which is really cool because you can just, it lets you invoke search engines out there. And so I'm using SERP API to run a Google search. I limit the results to site, docs.celigo.com. I give it the text of the question, and then I get back like any results. And I'm actually, in my case, I'm only interested in the first result from Google, because most of the time pinecone vector searches are very good. I only want Google's top result to put as a contender. So I do a Google search, and then I'm only looking at the top result to decide if I want to include that in my article that I send to OpenAI GPT-4. After I run the Google search, then I do a pinecone vector search. So here's where I'm looking in pinecone to find articles that match. And then so here I do a hook. After I get my articles from pinecone, and there's a lot of stuff I'm doing in here, and unfortunately it's complicated. Again, people can take this code from my template on the marketplace, and it's not that complicated, but it's also not trivial to explain. But here's what I'm doing at a very high level. So I get the matches from Pinecone, and then in there, each of those matches, I talked about this earlier, each match may have linked articles in it. So of those linked articles, I just get all of them. And so of all the articles that I found in Pinecone, I then get the linked articles, and I make sure that the linked articles are not pointing back to the articles that I found via the vector search. And then when I do find a new one, I then put it into a list. But then if I've already counted that one, then I'm incrementing a counter. And then I sort it. And basically what I'm doing is like, well, let's get the top, because I don't want to send too many articles to OpenAI. One, it has a limit on tokens, but two, it starts to fail once you send too many different articles. So I only want like 3 max. And so I just sort those articles and I pull the ones that are referenced the most. So if I get back 3 articles from my vector search and I have like 10 articles that those 3 articles are pointing to, I sort them such that I get the ones at the top are the ones that are getting pointed to the most. Maybe the top 2 are getting pointed to 3 times each. And so, that's just really helpful to, I want to get the most important articles. And so I get those top 3. And then what I do is like, okay, well now is the Google search article in there? If it is, then great, I don't have to do anything. I found it via Pinecone. I don't really do anything with Google at that point. But if it's not, then I put it into the top of my linked articles list, and then I push one out. I don't grab the other linked article. So now I still have 3 max, because again, I don't want too many articles. But the Google one goes to the top of the list because I want to make sure that one's included. So now it's like I have Google's article, which Pinecone could not find, so that's interesting in itself. And then the 2 from Pinecone, or I just have 3 from Pinecone, plus the original matches that came. And then that's all kind of in one big little structure. And I think real quick, I'll just show you too. In Pinecone, I'm only returning 2 articles. So you can see here, this field top K, that's how many matches you want to get back. I'm only returning 2. I had 3 for a while, but it just 2 is perfect. 2 articles that match from our product docs. And then also I have a filter too, that will only get things that have a 75 similarity, 0.75 similarity score or greater. That seems to be good. You could probably go higher, but 0.75 is working well. Okay, so now the next step is really cool. So basically, again, I know the number of tokens on each of these articles because I'm storing that. If the number of tokens is greater than 2,000, I want to shrink the articles. And all I'm doing to shrink the articles is I am sending the article to OpenAI. I guess we'll look at it here real quick. I'm using GPT 3.5 Turbo 16K, so this gives the biggest payload possible. And I am doing a system prompt that says, let's look at it. You will be provided with a document delimited by triple quotes. Your task is to select excerpts as is which pertain to the following question. And so again, I have the question that the user asked in Slack. I have this huge document, and I'm asking OpenAI to just find the excerpts in the doc which are relevant to the question. And then I have to say at the end, because again, this is where OpenAI, you got to give it really explicit instructions, otherwise it does its own thing. I'm saying, hey, ensure that all the excerpts contain all relevant context needed to interpret them. Don't give me little small snippets that are missing the context. And then I also had to say, do not add any commentary or extra text to the excerpts, because what I found it was doing was saying, it was explaining why it pulled something, or even trying to answer the question as it related to the excerpt. And I don't want it to do that, because then when I feed that to the final GPT-4 thing, it was messing up the question. It was like, oh, the answer is right here, and the answer came from this, but I don't want this 3.5 thing to even try to answer at all. So you have to say very explicit stuff like that. And again, over in the playground also, we built this in the playground, OpenAI playground, and this is where we did a lot of experimenting to get this to work really well. Okay, so again, really cool pattern. You can send something big, ask for just the excerpt back, and then map that back into so the response mapping takes what was returned and puts that into the content. So now the content of my article, which used to be the huge article, is just the excerpts. Okay, and then now what I'm doing over here is I'm fetching the sources from the linked articles. So, before I had run my search, my vector search for similar articles, it gave them back, I shrank them, but now I need to go fetch the linked articles, kind of like how I fetched the explicit article that was provided when the user gave me the article to look at. Here I'm now getting my linked articles via a fetch, and also the Google search result too is where I would get this as well, if in fact I'm getting a Google thing. And then again, same pattern where I shrink them, because sometimes the fetched articles are big, and actually it's more likely the fetched articles, which are typically the ones you link to that are foundational, they're more likely to be big. So shrinking them here was key. And then, okay, so now we're going, we've got all the articles, we've shrank them, and we just send them to GPT-4 to do the final answer, and then everything else on the flow is the same. And again, I would just want to say that I'm only getting 2 articles from Pinecone. I'm allowing a maximum of 3 linked articles, and if there's a Google unique article, I always make sure that's one of the 3. So 5 articles max is what I found does the best results. Okay, now the last branch here. So again, we went down the Zendesk article branch. Now we're going to do one for Slack. Very similar. We just run a similarity search, but here we're looking for Slack data, not Zendesk articles. I think I just want to say one little thing here. So we're searching in Pinecone for like kind of a different source of information. We are using namespaces in Pinecone. So they have a namespace concept. It's just a great way to segregate data. All of our Zendesk articles are in one namespace. All of our Slack conversations are in another. We have a lot of other plans to put other data into Pinecone, and everything that we put in is going to go into its own namespace. And then this just works really well so that you never are mixing and matching things. It's very, you're not going to like blow data away or update things on accident when you're upserting into it. And then when you're searching, you're always very explicit about what you're looking for. And again, it's not really good to mix and match. You don't really want to do a vector search across namespaces because then some results will overcrowd the other ones. So it's better to do separate ones. And if you need to do both, and speed is really important, then run them in parallel. Pinecone itself is lightning fast when you're running searches. So run them in parallel and combine them after. And if you really want to use an AI to combine them, you can too. You can just get both results and send them back to an AI and say, combine these in some way if you can't do it programmatically, So anyway, search Pinecone, different namespace. Then here we're just sending, now we've got everything we need on this flow. This is a pretty simple branch. We send the Slack threads. Again, we send that JSON serialized mess to GPT-4 with the question. And then we get the answer back and we post that back to Slack and then also the sources. So same pattern that we saw above, slightly different mappings and information, but same pattern. And so that's the flow. If I zoom way out, we can kind of see what it looks like at a high level. It's just a listener with multiple branches, some in parallel, some, for choose first matching, and and that's it. So zooming out back to the chatbot itself, we have a 3-flow solution touching, let's see, we have OpenAI, Pinecone, SERP API if you want to do a Google search, Slack and Zendesk. If you're not using Zendesk for your knowledge base, I'm sure whatever system you are will have some way of getting those articles out. And that's it. And so now I think to close this out, again, we went pretty deep on everything here. To close it out, let's just look at what it looks like in Slack. And so here I have the AI. Okay, so here's the channel that we built where we're listening for messages. And here's where users can type messages. And and so a couple things. This is interesting. There's 144 people from Soligo in here right now, and I never really announced that we built this. I mean, I've done the videos, and we've talked about it. It's been hyped up a little bit, but I'm not like sending all hands email to everyone saying there's this new AI chatbot. But every day more and more people are joining. The word is spreading, so it's really cool to see it kind of organically spread throughout the org where people are talking about it and coming in here and trying it out. And I'm getting a lot of positive feedback from people that the answers are great. They're really helping people accelerate what they're working on, people on our doc team, people in the support team and the training department. So again, really good feedback on the in solution, which like none of this is meaningful at all if it's not like an in solution that your fellow employees find useful and want to use. So it's really cool to see that. And then let's look at just something that happened today, right? A question came in from a product manager named Tyler. If I manually run a Delta flow, then and it's daisy chained to another flow, does the Delta time specified during the manual run carry over to the second flow? And so you can see here that the first AI generated answer using the internal Slack threads says, when you manually run a Delta flow, it is daisy chained to another flow. It does carry over, and so on. And then it gives you here. So here's where it's giving you the exact Slack threads that were used to answer this. And so of course you're going to want to, before passing this on to a customer or doing anything official with it, you would go read those threads to validate. But he did, and so we were just chatting about this. So he said this is a great answer, but I can't find anything in the knowledge base on this. So then he he tags our documentation manager and says, hey, can we get these 2 articles updated with the information? And then here we see the answer. So this is the answer that were from the current documentation. And so this answer is wrong, but it's very now obvious to see that this is the wrong answer. And so now and then you can see also the articles that it used to link to find this. And so it's just much more straightforward to go and get those articles updated, and so on. So again, really valuable tool that found the Slack threads with the right answer, highlighted that the docs made it easy for someone who knows the answer to know that the docs are wrong. And then of course we latch on conversations within our internal people to get things fixed as soon as possible. And then, oh yeah, so the last thing too is, so also when we're looking at the articles that were used, so you can see again the article link, the similarity score if it was found via Pinecone, and then here you can see there were 2 linked articles, and then this one it was excerpts only because it's just a really big article, and so it says, hey, I only used excerpts from that. So anyway, so that's it. I can't think of anything else I want to show. Hopefully you find this video informative. I'm going to make sure I tag it as a deep dive so that only people that are interested in really getting into the details have to spend, I don't know how long I've been talking for. But anyway, hope everyone enjoys this video, and happy integrating. Bye.